Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And this episode is brought to you by our patrons. We appreciate everybody's support. It is the main thing keeping us going at this point. And if you'd like to join our Patreon, then please do. You can head over to patreon.com/iknowdino and find out what kind of rewards we offer, as well as what our upcoming goals are. This week, we have a bunch of news, including an update on Hadrosaur display structures and some new dinosaur discoveries. We also have a quick review of the Claire Deering DLC for Jurassic World Evolution. We have an interview with Tadd Galusha, author of the graphic novel Cretaceous. We have Dinosaur of the Day, Riojasaurus. And we have a full-fledged Erictodromeus burrow level fun fact.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot. So let's get into it. As always, we like to start by thanking our patrons who keep the podcast running. And this week, we'd like to thank Kyle, Brendan Kavanaugh, the Tolbert family, Sean Tanagaki, Remy Rodriguez, Marcy, Rohan, Bradley, Bilal, Scully, Avery, Crispy, Joaquin, Jeb from Arkansas, Aiden James, Albertosaurus, and Alan. And if you've been following us closely, you know that we recently had to buy some new gear to start live streaming, and we wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of our patrons. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you. The live streaming was a success.
Yeah, literally tens of people tuned in.
Hey, that's more than you were expecting.
It actually is, yeah. It was a lot of fun. But more on that later. First up in dinosaur news, we have, as promised, an update on Hadrosaur display structures. Specifically, it's an update on how much the Hadrosaur Prosaurolophus changed as it grew up. In other words, ontogenetic changes, as paleontologists like to say. And this paper was published in JVP. It was written by Eamon Drysdale and others. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And it's actually an update from the same author's work that was presented on a poster in SVP way back in 2017. And it might be the first time that I saw one of these specimens. It looked so familiar to me, but I'm not sure. I might have also just seen it elsewhere. It's so hard to keep track these days. Their goal with the poster was to compare Prosaurolophus crests throughout their life as they grew up and see if things changed as they aged. It's kind of a common question when we're talking about things like hadrosaurs or ceratopsians, and we assume that these big frills or these big crests on their head or other features might be due to sexual dimorphism, or perhaps all the animals of the species trying to attract one another. Sometimes both animals will have kind of similar display structures to stand out from other species, for example. But typically when that's a case, you only see it in adults because they're the ones that are looking for mates. With the younger ones, they tend to look a little bit more plain, or they don't put all this energy into display structures because they're busy putting energy into just try to stay alive.
And growing.
Exactly, yeah. So a big part of figuring out if these structures were used functionally or if they were used for just display is to figure out what age that they showed up at. So a quick background on Prosaurolophus, because it is not one of the most popular dinosaurs. The holotype of Prosaurolophus maximus, that's the species name. There's only one species within the Prosaurolophus genus. All the other ones have been synonymized. Was described by Barnum Brown just over 100 years ago based on an incomplete skull. But it was still a pretty good find. It's not like some of these where it's just like a single tooth and we're trying to name Troodon based on it or something. But their goal with the paper was to compare Prosaurolophus crests and see if they changed as they aged. So they obviously had to include a lot more new dinosaurs to kind of round out that picture. And fortunately for the authors, since then they've found over a dozen more individuals of Prosaurolophus from Alberta and Montana. So we have a pretty good smattering of the puzzle pieces of what Prosaurolophus looked like as it grew up. This paper focuses specifically on 3 relatively recent finds that are juveniles, all from Alberta. And I say relatively recently because they're a lot more recent than 100 years ago, but the oldest one is from 1983 and the most recent one is from 2016. So if you're really closely following Prosaurolophus, you may have already heard of all of these.
Sure. 2016 wasn't that long ago.
No, yeah. I think we were already podcasting back then.
We were.
So there's a chance that we even talked about that one when it got discovered. But maybe not, because by far the best looking one is TMP 1998.50.1. And TMP is the designation for the Royal Tyrrell Museum. And this one reminds me of one of those ancient Roman marble busts. So it's really nicely articulated, and it's essentially all the bones between the middle of the back, the tip of the head or snout, and halfway down the forearm. So it's just like one of those busts that kind of has the arms broken off too from age.
Nice.
If you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It also includes skin impressions that are kind of stuck over on the back part by the ribs. All told, the whole block is about 125 centimeters or 4.1 feet long. So it's a pretty good sizable chunk of dinosaur articulation. And I think it just looks amazing. It's one of the coolest looking hadrosaur finds I've seen. In this individual, the skull is about 44% the length of an adult skull. Really, they're comparing it to the largest adult skull known, because I guess if you're trying to compare it with how big it could have gotten, you might as well pick the biggest one and work back from there.
Mm-hmm.
The other two individuals have skulls that are about 40% the length of an adult. So they're all kind of in the same ballpark, although maybe the one that's 44% would have been a few months or a year or something older.
Or maybe it grew up to be, or would have grown up to be bigger.
Yeah, or it was growing faster. Who knows? But these 40% grown individuals are the smallest known Prosaurolophus individuals described to date. So we've got the full range of the spectrum if you include the largest adult and then these little guys. And the focus of the paper was on the skull because they're looking at those kind of cranial structures like head crests and other display things that we think hadrosaurs had on their head and not other parts of their body. So it's a little bit different than some of the other recent papers we've talked about with like the stance switching from quadrupedal to bipedal or vice versa and all that kind of stuff that changes when it ages. This is a lot less important to sort of the everyday life of the dinosaur. It's more about, selecting a mate kind of thing. Probably not a super functional part of the head, more just a display structure.
Right. But very important for continuing the species.
Yes. They're definitely highly selected for, because if you can't mate, then you're not going to have any offspring, and therefore your unexciting looking head is not going to be remembered. But anyway, apparently all three of these finds were preserved in fine mudstone from the bottom of the Western Interior Seaway, and Drysdale told the University of Calgary that it might mean that Prosaurolophus spent a lot of time on the shore, and then when it died, it could have easily gotten washed out to sea and then buried. And then, of course, fortunately, all the other stars aligned so that it actually fossilized without getting eaten, and it got buried in the right kind of rock, and then nothing messed with it for 75 million years. And here we are. Unfortunately, the skin that's preserved on 1998-51 was over its ribs and not its face, because if it had been on its face, maybe we could get some really cool detail about what kind of structure it had there. But on the ribs, it's basically just like, it's little bumps, scales.
It's still something.
Yeah, there weren't any feathers or anything, so it sort of reconfirms the idea that hadrosaurs probably didn't have a lot of feathers. Like I said, the researchers were especially interested in how its crest changed as it grew, and with the 40% sized Prosaurolophus, the crest was not very developed. It was basically barely there. And the crest on Prosaurolophus, if you're not familiar with it, is basically just a small bump at the top of the nose. So it kind of reminds me of my nose, because I've got this big bump situation going.
It's not a big bump, but
yeah, I mean, relative to human noses, it's pretty big. Not big compared to a Prosaurolophus.
Do you have the kind of nose to attract mates?
Yeah,
Is that
so
what that means?
I don't think that in humans, large noses attracts mates. I almost did a fun fact on which animals do use noses to attract mates, but I couldn't find really great sources on it. There are some monkeys, though, for sure, that have like these big red noses. So anyway, not so much with humans, though. We got other stuff going on. When they looked closely at the other individuals, they found that the crest grew isometrically, unlike on lambeosaurs, with the more impressive head crests. And isometrically, again, basically means that it grows evenly as the animal ages. And that usually means that it's not a good signal for showing when a dinosaur is ready to mate, because if the teenaged one just has a slightly larger one than, the preteen one that isn't able to mate, it's not going to be a great signal. So they're thinking that's probably not what that little crest is for. They do also talk quite a bit about the quote-unquote Circum depression, which is basically an area of the skull which seems to sort of sink in as Prosaurolophus ages.
Oh, wow.
It like goes a little bit concave in this one spot.
I was thinking that's the opposite of a human because when the baby is born, right, there's the soft spot that fills in.
Yeah, this is almost like if you had, I don't even know how to describe it. It looks so strange on the skull, but like if your forehead kind of caved in a little bit as you got older.
Huh.
Obviously, their brain isn't right behind their forehead like it is with ours. It's, there's a little more space, but it's super weird. I don't know what's up with it. They did note that basically is about the same shape for all the Prosaurolophus, and it's one of the better characteristics to name it as Prosaurolophus because it always has the same characteristic shape to it, although it gets much deeper as the animal ages. So since that's growing allometrically, it might be related to a display structure. And they also found that the snout length grows allometrically, meaning that it really starts to lengthen its more or less nose as it gets older. And there were also some other features like with the jaw that changed a little bit faster than its age once it reached sexual maturity. So combining all of that information, they think that it's a safe bet that crest probably wasn't used for sexual display, but there might have been some sexual display going on with the snout or the nose, basically, rather than that head crest. But since there aren't any big bony growths out of the snout, it does get longer allometrically, but it doesn't really bulge out like we see on lambeosaurs. You see like those huge, crazy head crests, like Prosaurolophus shooting off the back of the head or something.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything like that going on with Prosaurolophus. So what they're speculating is that maybe there would have been a big soft tissue growth sort of bulging out of the nose as it got older.
And it got so heavy that it caused this depression in the skull.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's related to blood supply or if that's even in the right spot for the nose, because it's a little bit hard to tell exactly where they think the soft tissue would have been compared to where that depression is. So I'm not sure if that's specifically supposed to be related, but maybe, yeah, like it's paving the way for more blood supply or something to the soft tissue. I guess that's possible. And the fact that there's no bony growth, though, for having a big nose makes perfect sense to me, because if you took an x-ray of my head, you wouldn't know that I have a huge nose because it's all just cartilage. You have to see me while I'm alive in order to catch that. And unfortunately, we don't have any living Prosaurolophus to look at. But long story short, we might have to update at least some of our Hadrosaur art with big fleshy noses on their snouts if this pans out.
That could be fun.
Yeah. I like anything that makes dinosaurs look more weird.
Mm-hmm.
And there's got to be tons of stuff we don't know about that made lots of them look weirder than we expect.
Oh, I'm sure. Even what we do know is pretty weird.
Yes.
In other dinosaur news, in Chongqing, China, scientists have found a new dinosaur species. It's not yet named, but it's part of a group of specimens that they found that include a theropod and an ornithopod. And these were in the same area as the 18-kilometer fossil wall that's all the fossils are from the Jurassic. The wall was discovered back in 2007. It's got more than 4,000 fossil pieces.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sure they're learning a lot.
Man, just like China, they just find thousands of items like it's nothing.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty cool.
Here, like how many news cycles would that hit if we found 4,000 pieces of fossil somewhere? It would be all over the place. But since it happened in China, we're like the only ones that talk about it.
We found the news item somehow, so other people probably did.
Yeah,
too.
it's on a .cn website, so good work, Sabrina.
Well, another thing in China, in Jiangsu Province, 4 dinosaur footprints have been found. This was by a joint China and U.S. research team that published about it in the Geological Bulletin of China. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the paper, but the news item that I found about it said that the sauropod footprints are about 100 million years old, and these footprints, quote, had been mistaken for footprints of Li Sunxiao, who lived around 858 to 894, a famous general in the late Tang dynasty, which was the year 618 to 907, and the tiger he fought, end quote. This is according to Xinglida. 3 toes from the footprints were lost, so that's why it looks like a human foot. The team's working now to protect the tracks.
I love the different stories of what people interpreted dinosaur tracks as before we knew about dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a giant emu, or it's
A giant human.
yeah, but missing 2 toes because they got attacked by a tiger or something.
Well, this one, it looked more human-like because we couldn't see all the toe prints.
Oh,
Because it was a sauropod toe print. But yeah. Next, in Nevada, the Las Vegas Natural History Museum has a new exhibit called Dinosaurs Take Flight, and that focuses on Archaeopteryx. You might have guessed that based on Dinosaurs Take Flight.
Makes sense.
It's a traveling exhibit from Silver Plume Exhibitions in the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History. It has 50 pieces of original artwork, and you can see it from now until September 15th. We might be able to go.
Maybe. And before we get into our interview, I want to give a quick review of the Claire Sanctuary DLC for Jurassic World Evolution. So that's what I've been live streaming. I think I've done about 5 hours of it or so.
Have you finished?
No, I really wanted to finish it before we recorded this so that I could give a review of the entire thing. But last night it was getting around like 9 p.m. and it was just, I was running out of steam. I couldn't keep going for more than 4 hours in one stretch. So overall, I think the DLC is pretty good. Claire is actually voiced by Bryce Dallas Howard in the game, which is kind of nice because I don't think Owen Grady is voiced by Chris Pratt. I think it's one of those sound-alike situations. But in addition to that, there are 3 new dinosaurs. There's an Albertosaurus, Euoplocephalus, and Aranosaurus. So we have the new Tyrannosaur, Ankylosaur, and Hadrosaur. Nice little diversity there. The main other feature in the expansion is a greenhouse, which allows you to cultivate specific plants for different dinosaurs.
Oh, so you have a wide variety of herbivores?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think it gets into any sort of things that the carnivores want to eat. They call it paleobotany, so I think it's all going to be plants.
Right. But you feed the right herbivores, that'll attract more carnivores.
I suppose. But, I mean, they're all in cages because you
orchestrated.
So, yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully it doesn't make the herbivores start smelling extra tasty so that the T-Rex wants to burst out and go get them. The expansion is basically a new campaign, and it's a little bit frustrating at first because you start out on Isla Nublar, and it's like the volcano starting to erupt, so there's a lot of stuff that's kind of damaged, and they don't let you build any new power infrastructure, so you're stuck trying to cram everything really close to one substation on a map, which is kind of frustrating, and something I did not notice for about the first 10 minutes of the live stream. I kept trying to build things, and I was like, I'll build it right next to the power plant. That'll work.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, that didn't work. Tear it down, build it somewhere else. And then eventually I figured out like, oh, yeah, no new substations. Okay, here we go. Anyway, keep that in mind if you're playing the game because that's an important point, and try to like keep the dinosaur pens such a way that you're not taking up all the space that's useful because there's a power station there. And then the rest of the time you're on Isla Sorna is basically developing a new medicine that apparently you need before transporting them off of Isla Nublar to quote-unquote sanctuary, which is super weird to me because the entire time there's a volcano erupting and they're acting like, well, we can't transport these dinosaurs because they're sick. They're going to get killed by the volcano. It's like, move them first, then we can heal them afterwards. Like, what's with the evacuation priorities? It's very strange. But basically, once you cure them, you get to pick 8 of the dinosaurs to move over to quote-unquote Sanctuary Island. And it's sort of like the one that Claire was promised in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. You know, the one that turned out to be a lie and there was no Sanctuary Island.
Spoilers.
Yeah, it's been like a year. Except on this Sanctuary Island, you still have to keep all the dinosaurs in cages. So it's not really like the Sanctuary Island that Claire was envisioning. But I digress. So far, after about 5 hours of playing and a couple of live streams, I think I'm getting near the end of the campaign, but I'm not entirely certain. I doubt there's going to be anywhere to go after Sanctuary, and I think I've got like 2 out of the 4 missions done, so I should be like at least 2/3 of the way done.
And then the dinosaurs live happily ever after.
Could be. Oh, one more tip I should give. When you choose which dinosaurs you're transporting off the island, I'm pretty sure they arrive in the same order onto Sanctuary. So I actually picked all 3 carnivores to transport first, which made it a little bit tricky because then I had to frantically build 3 different enclosures so the carnivores didn't eat each other. But it was also kind of nice that I picked them because you don't have a lot of money when you start. So if you have really exciting carnivores in your camp, then you make more money from the tourism. There's still tourism on the sanctuary island too, by the way, which is kind of strange. So overall, I think it's pretty good. I'll put some links to the live streams that I did in the show notes in case you're interested and missed it the first time. But it's a reasonably good expansion, especially if you're into the paleobotany. That's the main change.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And something that doesn't get talked about too much.
Yeah, there's a bunch of plants I've never heard of. And one of them is rotted wood.
Ooh.
And you have to pay like $100,000 to research rotted wood. It's like, what research do I need to do? We're on a jungle island, kid. I just go into the woods, pick some rotted wood and throw it in there.
You don't want to make the dinosaurs sick?
Well, I think it might actually be based on how they discovered that hadrosaurs eat some rotted wood to get like the different insects that eat the wood. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, I think they actually probably did quite a bit of work to figure out the paleobotany section. It's kind of cool.
It sounds like it. People we've talked to who've worked on this series, they all talk about the amount of research that they do.
Yeah. And before we get into our interview, we want to remind everybody that we almost always have a extra long version of our interviews for our patrons. So if you are a patron, make sure you listen to that interview. If you're interested in that, you might want to listen to that and then skip over this version. And if you're not a patron, please consider joining our Patreon. And you can do that at patreon.com/iknowdino. And now on to our interview with Tadd Galusha.
Today we get to chat with Tadd Galusha, who is the writer and illustrator of the graphic novel Cretaceous, published by Oni Press. And he's a comic artist and illustrator who also created the webcomic The Backwoods, and he's worked on Godzilla and TMNT Ghostbusters 2. So yeah, Cretaceous, Garrett and I loved it.
Oh,
the illustrations are gorgeous. And it's really, the storyline's so action-packed.
It is.
Yeah, you know, I have gotten a few. I had a few fans tell me, I guess, kind of as a critique, they thought it was a little too action packed. And now that I've grown a bit, I think they might be right. We do have a lot of. There's a lot of predation in this book. Let's put it that way. I would probably try and focus on a little bit more of some of the environmental factors, or maybe I don't know, just a few like animal society, building a little bit more. But yeah, I feel like dinosaur on dinosaur violence. If it's kid friendly, it's definitely for you.
Yeah, I mean it's a graphic novel, right? Is that the
yeah?
So I mean, with a graphic novel, you're not expecting it to be like a long, plotting storyline like Game of Thrones, where like the whole first book is setting up characters. It's usually a lot of action. So it's kind of like if you didn't have a lot of dinosaur on dinosaur crime or violence, you'd be like, where is it? Why aren't they fighting?
Yeah, exactly. I'd be doing the reader a little bit of a disservice. And, when I first wrote the book, I particularly picked certain animals in mind to focus on because I wanted to have kind of familiar faces. So, your Tyrannosaurus Rex, your Triceratops, I wanted those ones to be kind of the standout focal points, just for story structure. Just it's a good way of, you give somebody something familiar that they recognize, and then you start introducing new characters. And so hopefully if I get to do a sequel to it, I'll get to start kind of delving into different types of animals and maybe start flirting around with, more complex social habits of the animals as well, which that could be really fascinating, I think, especially if you look at, like birds, like the mating rituals of birds and stuff, like start working that in. It could get really, really bizarre.
Yeah, that could be really cool.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot of these dinosaurs have feathers too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, like when I first sat down and started writing it, I hadn't really, I guess, delved back into dinosaurs since probably the 90s. And, back then it was very, Jurassic Park was still very acceptable, at least for a lot of people, as to what their dinosaurs should look like. And I think it was, what was that book? Was it Backer's book? Was it the Dinosaur Heresies?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, where he was kind of like, he was kind of this extreme guy saying like, oh no, we got feathers and they were super active. And he's throwing out all these kind of things that now we just take as like a normalcy. Even like, you talk to any just person off the street, that's vaguely familiar with dinosaurs. They're like, oh yeah, they had feathers. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that I tried to depict at least the small theropods completely feathered with like bare legs and stuff, kind of, like what you'd see like in an emu or an ostrich, something familiar to that. Now the T-Rex, old T-Rex, that was a hot tension point for me and the publisher and some like early reviewers, because as you guys probably know, that's got to be one of the most debated things amongst dinosaur fans. Did the T-Rex have feathers?
Paleontologists too, for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I started getting on some of these like I guess Facebook groups and just watching these battles unfold, and I'm like whoa, this is intense. Like I was a little nervous as to how it would be perceived, because I went with the naked T-Rex for Cretaceous, and the only reason why I did that was, is it Tom Holtz? Did he just write maybe 2 years ago a book on tyrannosaurs?
The Tyrannosaur Chronicles?
Yes.
David Hone.
Okay, that's who it was. David Hone. Terrible with names.
Me too.
I caught a lecture by him on YouTube, and he was talking about the kind of debate. And he said, he had a great point where he said they may have had feathers, but as far as we know, if we look at all of the Albertosaurs that we found, all of the Tyrannosaurs that we found, and and he was referencing to a lot of other like the larger Tyrannosaurs, especially in North America. He's like, there's no feathers. He's like, we got skin impressions. It doesn't mean that they didn't have feathers, but as far as we know at this point, we haven't found any real like tangible evidence for it. So I decided that for me, that was like the breaking point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to completely cover my Tyrannosaur in some type of beautiful plumage, which you see a lot of paleo illustrators doing, because it's, it's new, it's interesting. It is, you could do some really cool stuff with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a little aggressive, especially since, I've heard some topics about like, what's the purpose of it? Is you got a really large animal. We know that like a lot of the ceratopsians and the, hadrosaurs and the sauropods, they don't have any need for this. And a lot of it might due to size. I don't know. So like, you got thermal regulation, you got all these factors that are hot, debatable topics. But yeah, so I just I kept the T-Rex looking familiar, and I just kind of went with what we currently know. Now, if they find a T-Rex that's like just covered in just beautiful, beautiful feathers, then I guess in the sequel, T-Rex is going to have a beautiful, beautiful feathers all over his body.
Nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
I feel like recently we've gone, I don't know, not even 180, maybe like 360. What comes after that? Like 720. We've gone around so many times on like, it was no feathered in like Jurassic Park, and then we're like, no, it's feathered, and then it was not feathered because they found some skin impressions, but then we found Tyrannus and it was like, nope, it was feathered again. And then lately you've got like Carr and others saying like, no, look at the mouth, around the mouth, that we can tell it's scale, so it's not feathered. So we've gone back and forth so many times that really, I think it's almost like with science in general, you go with the consensus, like the previous consensus, unless it's proved otherwise. And it kind of seems like most of the time we're at the non-feathered. So that's the safe bet, at least. And then, until it's proved, like we find a good one with some feathers, then you'd be like, okay, yeah, now we could switch.
I did the even though there's absolutely nothing to support this, I put like kind of fluffy down all over the young juvenile tyrannosaurs that we feature in the book. And I just had this idea of like, oh, maybe as they grow, get bigger and bigger, because they grow at some crazy rate.
Yeah.
Like maybe they just kind of lose this like insulating down, and maybe you would get kind of a sub-adult that might have a ridge of feathers that's left over from when it was young. I mean, who knows? We don't know. But I think that's like if I had to do when I do the sequel, which would pick up kind of where this first volume leaves off. That's what I would do with I guess our focal juvenile Tyrannosaur. I don't want to give away too much.
Right. Yeah, because it's kind of a twist.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a twist.
It's a constant twist.
Actually, yeah, there's a bunch of twists.
I don't know what it exactly reminds me of, but I've seen similar concept in, I want to say like a Pixar short before a movie or something, where it kind of, you see an action sequence and then like an animal moves through that scene and it becomes the new focal point, and it just kind of keeps you guessing on where the story's going. You never really know who the protagonist is until you get to the end and you're like, oh, that's where it all makes sense now. It all kind of tied together.
Yeah, I looked at a lot is like old nature documentaries, because you'd have like a biologist, right, who'd sit out in the field for a year or two filming animals. And, animals, it's so hard to observe animals in their natural habitat just because they cover large distances and they generally know you're there before you know they're there. So they don't want anything to do with you. And if you watch those old docs, even the current ones, they bring in other, I guess we'll say, characters, but it's other footage of other animals that they were able to pick up while they were observing this one particular species. And so it gives you a better idea of the biome that your focal point operates in. But at the same time, you can tell a story while interjecting like small, like tiny little like secular stories that all kind of fold into the main narrative, but aren't 100% necessary to tell that story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of brings up, it's not just dinosaurs in your book. You've got turtles and sharks and pterosaurs and like all the supporting cast that really fill out the rest of the ecosystem really nicely.
Yeah, thanks. I really wanted to make sure, one of the big things I want to emphasize is that I showcase that it wasn't just dinosaurs. We have reptiles, we have birds. I wanted to get more into like the insects, but I had a hard time finding a lot of info on insects, if I'm being honest. So I kind of just glazed over that.
I think in the Hell Creek, since you're focused on Cretaceous in North America, I don't think we have a ton of insect stuff.
Yeah.
Like you tend to find that in like amber and like more pristine little fossil layers, whereas in Hell Creek it's like big sandstone stuff. It's not like that kind of microscopic level.
Yeah, if I would have been smart, I would have placed this like taking place in like Manchuria or someplace where there's just so much like diversity in animals and there's just so much coming out of there that I could just get crazy with it.
Yeah, but you squeezed a lot of stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about the insects. You do have a few of those. It's also hard because if your protagonist is a dinosaur, they don't really interact with insects all that much.
Right. You might get, I kept thinking of like, because I live up in Alaska. So if you see like a moose or bear, especially if they've been busy feeding, like a lot of times they'll just be covered in like clouds of mosquitoes or flies and stuff. And so I kind of was like, it would be interesting is like, we have that one point, when we first introduced you to the Tyrannosaur, it's bringing back a kill back to its nest. I don't know if they did that, but it seemed like it'd be an interesting thing to do for the story. And I just wanted it to, as it's carrying this animal, like, especially in like kind of a climate as that, I just pictured like just swarms of insects, like flies and insects just building around, even like small birds picking off the insects, picking off the carcass. Cause you got this massive animal that's carrying, like you said, it's so big, it probably wouldn't even take notice to, a horsefly or, a small, sparrow or something. Like, why would it care? What's that going to do to it?
Yeah, that's really true, though. I like that touch. I noticed you also had another scene where there's a bunch of flies surrounding like wounded animal, and it made me cringe a little bit because they're like, oh no, they're like eating it because it's wounded.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, one of the big things that it always has irked me in the past is when I would read these type of books or even you watch like a nature movie, they leave everything real clean and real. They kind of soften the hard edges that are the realities of like animals, just existing in nature. And we have a tendency to like anthropomorphize kind of nature and make it kind of this like, like, oh, it's this loving, wonderful place. And we have all these beautiful animals running around. And maybe it's just me because I grew up in the Northwest and I live in Alaska, but you spend 2 days out in the wilderness, like backcountry, and you start realizing very quickly how, like, if you didn't have all this stuff and you're just by yourself, like, nature is this brutal, visceral place. And there's a reason why, like, a lot of animals, if they're not the apex of the, of the environment they exist in, their lifespan is not very long, unless they're real crafty.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the different, I guess, attack styles depending on the animal.
Yeah, like I've always been, like, originally when I went to school, I was a zoology major, and I just quickly found out that I don't have the mind to retain the things you need to retain to get through those classes. But I've always had that interest in, biology, zoology, all that kind of stuff. So that I really started kind of leaning on that when it came into like the animals' habits and how they would, like, okay, if, we got a Dakota raptor and it's going after like a wounded tyrannosaur, how would they go about this? They're not going to just like go straight up to it, because it's still, you have the physics of the animal's size that's not going to be a smart move on a Dakota raptor, which is a big, powerful animal, but still it's dealing with an animal that's so much larger than it. I kind of looking at, like, you look at like lions, the way they go after those water buffaloes in Africa. And, those are always just these epic struggles of kind of titans, and the water buffaloes are just relying on like sheer mass and size to deal with these lions that are being pretty smart. They're setting up traps and kind of blindsiding it, because they know that if they're going to take out like a large bull, that's the only way they're going to do it. If they go straight in, they're done, they're dead. And so I like to approach everything in the book as like, there's risks for the animals in every engagement. So even like the Dromaeosaurus, when they deal with the Triceratops at a point, and they don't really do very well. They kind of, even being sneaky and tricky, it's just, these still have, it's like they kind of underestimated this like old injured Triceratops.
Right.
And they found out real quickly, like, oh no, these injuries might be more superficial than they look. We're in trouble. And yeah, so I tried to just, like anytime you're telling a story, especially in comics, you have to build the actions of your characters based off the physics of the situation and the surrounding environment. So I really tried to kind of lean on that while, doing fun dinosaur action.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like too that you were talking about if and when you do a sequel. I'm saying when now. You were talking about like doing a different ecosystem, because it's great that you did Hell Creek, but Hell Creek is starting to get a little that way too, where everybody kind of does the same dinosaurs. Although I like that you brought in some of the lesser known dinosaurs and stuck actually to Hell Creek, because a lot of times people will be like, it's Hell Creek plus a Brontosaurus and a Velociraptor and the other ones that people know about from the other parts of the world.
I did do a little fudgery. If you look, there's a double splash page. I don't remember. It's pretty far back in the book. And I did throw, is it an Alamosaur? The big sauropod? Oh, yeah. I did throw it in the background because I was like, well, they've found so few of these and know so little about it. Maybe it's big enough. I guess it could kind of go wherever it wanted. It could go up and down Laramidia, and nothing would really stand in its way except for maybe a mountain range or something. That's one of the things I want to do for the sequels. I want to, I actually have like a rough outline. I'll just say it right here. Why not? Spoilers, more spoilers. If it does come to fruition, then good on the listeners. They get a little sneak peek. The whole concept was, the book ends, this first time ends with the juvenile Tyrannosaur kind of like left into the world to make his way if possible. And the sequel would kind of pick up several years in the future where it had survived that vulnerable state in life and is now kind of like at a point where it needs to start making its way in the world, as like establishing itself as maybe a dominant predator in a region. So like a territory. And I wanted to start off with it. It basically just gets pushed out of the area it's occupying, where there's already like a Tyrannosaur family that's all set up, and they're, Big Mama is just kind of like, not happening. You need to leave now, or we're going to eat you. And so I wanted to have it go south, because you see this with mountain lions actually in North America, where they'll track a mountain lion that'll go, from Canada and take the Rockies all the way down to Denver.
Wow.
Or all the way down to like the Mexico border. And so I was like, okay, I should apply that here. And so basically we have this kind of like subadult, young adult Tyrannosaur that goes all the way down to like maybe Texas, Mexico region. And then we'd have, Alamosaurs and a whole different arrangement of animals that are a little bit different than, like you're saying, like the Hell Creek region. Mm-hmm. And there, the whole premise would be is because it's all of a sudden we have these gigantic titanosaurs that can get massive, especially like now with recent findings, they think that the Alamosaur got pretty big, right?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, a T-Rex could not, especially kind of a younger adult, could not take on one of these by itself,
For sure.
especially if they're in a herd. So I was like, well, what do young male animals do, like young male predators? And I looked at lions, and you'll see like on the Serengeti that young lions will team up and they'll form their own kind of like pseudo pride. So you'll have like 8 young males that are just waiting till they can, I guess, take over a pride someplace else or establish a territory once they're big and strong enough. And so I wanted to do that same dynamic where we have this young Tyrannosaur. He kind of out of necessity teams up with or packs up with a group of young Tyrannosaurs. And then they start, and then things get real interesting from there. They're hunting together through trials and tribulations. And then, we have certain members that are becoming a little bit bigger, a bit more dominant. And so we get some kind of competition for mating rights, territory rights, and we just go from there. So that would be volume 2. And it would be a bit more detailed, like on the ecological and biodiversity side of things, but also telling a bit more interesting of a story that's also kind of based in like what we see now with animals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
It does.
I'm not a biologist or a paleontologist.
Well, that's how a lot of these studies are too, is you learn what you can from the fossils and then you make comparisons to modern animals.
Yeah, for sure.
And behaviors that way. Yeah.
I want to give you a pass at Alamosaurus, though, because the only named titanosaur from North America, and basically like one of the only late Cretaceous sauropods we know in North America, is Alamosaurus. So in a way, we now think that like a lot of different dinosaurs we're all calling them Alamosaurus because we can't tell them apart from the few bones we have. So the fact that you called it Alamosaurus, it's like at this point in time, there might be something up there that right now we're calling Alamosaurus, and later on we'll be like, oh, we should split this out into Alamosaurus, and we'll call that one like Montano Titan or something, and they'll all of these different names. But at this point, like Alamosaurus as a Cretaceous titanosaur, it's like that's a pretty good broad category. It's almost like a category rather than a specific dinosaur.
Okay, good. That makes me feel much better about myself.
But also, you definitely need to make a sequel now. We want to know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely putting in the. They're probably getting sick of me. I'm pestering them so much. Hey guys, hey. Look! You want to look? I got ideas. Yeah.
Just send them a sketch like every single day.
Yeah,
pretty much. You just hound them until they're like, fine, just make it. Leave us alone. I mean, that's well, you guys know anything. Like if there's something you really want to do, you have to be your biggest kind of cheerleader, and you have to be a bit like proactive and a bit aggressive with it, even if sometimes people don't want to take the time to listen to you. But it's the only way. Like, I negotiated for this book for years, trying to get people, just meeting after meeting, trying to get someone to pull the trigger. And even when they did, it was, just to get it past the handshake agreement. That took years in itself as well. So yeah, I mean, that's not really dinosaur based, but there you go, people. If you got an idea for something, just you got to go after it. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to hear.
And that's, I think, the biggest reason why you got to do something you love, because if you don't love it, you're not going to have that energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And like with this, for me to be able to do the book, they took about maybe 9 months trying to find like a colorist. And because I'm colorblind, so I'm kind of like, if I can avoid doing colors, I would like to do that. And at the end of the day, like they had some really good prospects, but nobody that I felt had like an organic feel. They all kind of had a bit of a cartoony comic book coloring feel to it, which I was like, that's not going to work for this book. We need something kind of dirty, kind of gritty. So it came down to me going, okay, here's some sample pages. This is what it'll look like finished. And literally that's what I sent in the pages, I think at like probably 6 that night. And then 4 hours later, I had a contract like ready to go. Like, okay, yeah, yep, sign here. And then then you can start making the book.
Nice.
Yeah. It just, it was more work than I wanted to take on, but now that's all I want to do. I wouldn't want to bring in somebody else to help me out with the colors or anything. It's kind of funny how that works, right?
Yeah.
So being colorblind and how do you manage that? Is there like some software you can use or something to like make it more clear? I do all the line art is done in ink, and then I color it all digitally just on the computer. So that way I can, they've got kind of like they've got color grid systems that are set up so you can see where you are at, like if it's oversaturated or if, using like a kind of like a digital color wheel, I can see like, okay, I think I'm drawing blue, but really it's purple. So I can adjust it, same with like greens and reds. Like greens and reds are a nightmare for me at this point. So, and there's a lot of green in this because, we got a lot of
fair amount of red too.
Yeah, exactly. We got red, we got green. There's a lot of colors to manage in that. So if I wouldn't have had I guess some digital assistance, I would have been in big trouble.
Yeah. Mistaking blue for purple could make it look real goofy in a hurry.
Oh yeah. We could have some real purpley looking waves rolling in on the shore, which wouldn't necessarily be good.
Yeah. Or accidentally draw like Barney. Oops.
Yeah, right. Right.
So one of my favorite parts of your book too is something that you probably wouldn't guess, being that I'm a dinosaur fan. But when you have the Quetzalcoatlus barfing out the baby Troodon or whatever it is that it ate, I love that picture so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I just kept thinking about birds and how kind of birds are pretty gross, and especially when you watch them like feed their young. And I kept thinking like, I need to incorporate this in there somehow. And so I thought the old Quetzal just kind of fit the role for that. Just I really wanted to, I want to establish that it had young at some point. And I really wanted to do something where like it would eat something small, like either a small mammal or a small dinosaur, and then just regurgitate it out. Because, essentially that's what birds do.
Yeah.
Like it's as gross as it is, but it's a reality.
The babies look so excited.
Right? Yeah. Like, oh man, it's Christmas has come. Oh, here we go.
They're like fighting over it.
Yeah. I really thought that some of the gross factors of the book were going to end up getting edited by the publisher, but they were like, if anything, they were like, oh, this is great. Like there's a sequence on the beach where I think the Albertosaurs have been feeding on like a carcass and then they move on.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Rex that's kind of stalking them, it comes out and it checks out their kill. And then like I have it basically pee all over it because that's, like that's what animals do with like marking stuff. And it's just like the ultimate aggressive that a dinosaur can do without trying to kill each other.
I noticed that too. Yeah. Oh, it's making a statement.
Yeah. I was like, I really wanted it to be a statement. I thought for sure, it's like, oh, there's no way they're going to let me do this. This is totally, I'm going to turn in these pages and they're going to be like, you can't do this, Tadd. You have to edit this out. But, they looked at it and they were like, oh yeah, this is something that we see our dogs do at the park to each other every day. So this makes total sense. And I was so glad they made that connection. Yeah. So that, and then the puke for the babies scene, those both were kind of the gross out factors that, they were approved and adored. And I just got to think of some more gross things to do in the other book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those were both good examples, too, of kind of showing something emotional without actually showing words, too. Because, like, how are you going to show that this T-Rex is on, like, a rampage? You can show it, walking towards an animal it's upset with. But if you show it, like, marking its territory, that's, like, taking it up a notch.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that there becomes this disconnect, I think, a lot of times is that, and as much as I want to like the current Jurassic World movies, they kind of get away from it, except for maybe with the raptors, is they really make a disconnect of like, these are kind of thinking animals. A lot of them are thinking animals, especially the predators. Predators tend to be fairly intelligent, pretty cognitively aware of what's around them, what's going on. And so I really wanted to make sure that I gave the animals some type of personality, even if we don't see it a ton. There needed to be some element of it, or like when there's one of the first things I did in the book is I wanted to have a point where the T-Rex and the Triceratops look at each other like they have this kind of face off, and stereotypically it would be okay. Now we're going to get this battle of the Titans. And I love the idea of them coming across each other and being like, this is not worth my time. This is neither of the, for both of us, there's too much high risk. Why would I deal with trying to, I got some delicious Prosaurolophus babies over here that I can pick off. Why would I deal with this giant Triceratops man? You know what I mean? Just, and that's kind of how animals operate in the wild. Like grizzly bears don't necessarily go after full-grown moose. They go after their babies. Like right now, that's what's going on up here in Alaska. It's like, that's the thing to look out for is a bear is going after baby moose.
Don't get between a bear and a baby moose.
Pretty much, right?
So if our listeners wanted to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
The best place to, I guess, see what I'm up to is taddgalusha.com. That's my website. And then also I'm at Tadd Galusha on Twitter and Instagram. I usually post, especially on Instagram, I'm posting pretty often. Yeah. And then if people are interested in picking up a copy of Cretaceous, right now, I think the best place to get it is Amazon. Usually they have some pretty good deals going on. When the book came out, it was occupying that niche, that top sellers niche, in dinosaur children's books. So they somehow there is usually discounted. So I think right now you can get it for like $5 off its cover price, something like that. There's usually some type of sale going on over at Amazon. So that would probably be the best place to get it, fastest at least.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and talk about your work. And we are very excited. We're counting on you now to make the sequel.
Awesome. No, thank you for having me. This has been a blast. Like I told you before we recorded, I've been listening since like episode 2 or 3. And so I've pretty much listened to every episode at some point.
Oh man.
So it was kind of cool, like actually getting to be on an episode, as a guest. That was pretty awesome, I feel. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Tadd, for chatting with us. As we mentioned, we really enjoyed Cretaceous, and we're looking forward to the sequel, which you've promised us, sort of. We're going to hold you to it anyway. And now for our dinosaur of the day, Riojasaurus, which was a request from Dinosaur 4602, so thanks. It was a sauropodomorph that lived in the late Triassic in what is now the La Rioja province in Argentina in the Los Colorados Formation. The genus name means Rioja lizard, and the type species is Riojasaurus incertus. Incertus means uncertain in Latin. Many individuals have been found, maybe up to 20. Riojasaurus grew to be about 33 feet or 10 meters long, and it had a long neck and tail. It had bulky legs that were dense. They're very large for an early sauropodomorph, and it had hollow cavities in its vertebrae. It had 4 sacral vertebrae instead of 3, like other early sauropodomorphs. Riojasaurus was probably slow, and scientists used to think that it walked on 4 legs, but could rear up on its hind legs. Its forelimbs and hind limbs are similar in length. But in 2016, Scott Hartman found that Riojasaurus was probably bipedal because the hands were relatively straight back and the shoulder girdle was mostly immobile. Riojasaurus may have been cathamaral based on the scleral rings found in Riojasaurus compared to modern birds and reptiles. It's thought to be related to Melanorosaurus, a basal sauropodomorph that lived around the late Triassic, but studies in Bristol University in England found some key differences, such as longer bones in the neck. Both were large for their time. Riojasaurus was named in 1967 by Jose F. Bonaparte. No skull was found with the holotype, but Jose Bonaparte and Jose Pumares described a nearly complete skull in 1998. The skull was found on an exploratory trip in 1986. From the back, the skull looks pretty narrow. Both Bonaparte and Pumares found the skull had conical teeth. They also said the tooth row in the lower jaw is on the internal side of the jaw, quote, and its external border or cheek extends to the anterior portion of the dentary, which suggests the presence of thick lips, end quote.
Interesting.
Yeah. Don't hear about lips too often.
They were talking about them way back in 1998.
Mm-hmm. They also found some shared derived characters between Riojasaurus and Coelophysis, which may mean that they had a close common ancestor. They had similar height and elongation of the skull, as an example. Riojasaurus is the only known Riojasaurid from South America. Other sauropodomorphs have been found in the Los Colorados Formation, though, including Coloradosaurus and Lesomsaurus.
And our fun fact of the day is a doozy.
We can definitively say you went down the Eryctodromius burrow.
Oh, yeah. Multiple. It was a branching Eryctodromius burrow.
Oh, interesting.
And it is all thanks to the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which is an online place that cataloged a lot of really old articles and posted them for everybody to read. Specifically, what I was reading was the 11th edition of the Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London from 1843.
Wow.
And it is the place where Sir Richard Owen named the moa and gave it its scientific name, Dinornis. So once I found out there was this name Dinornis, I was like, what's the deal with Dinornis? Why does it almost sound like dinosaur? And it's really interesting that it's also Richard Owen. And he named it just 1 year after naming Dinosauria. And it starts with the same thing.
He had dino on the brain.
I think so, because he named dinosaurs in 1842, and then 1 year later, he's unknowingly reusing dinos to name another dinosaur, but he didn't realize it was a dinosaur at the time, obviously.
Oh, that's what you mean by unknown. I was thinking he knew dino.
He knew what dino was, yeah, but he didn't realize it was another dinosaur.
Right.
Otherwise, he could have just immediately lumped it in, and the moa could have been the fourth named dinosaur.
Well, it all worked out.
Yeah. So a little bit about this rabbit hole. First, the publication, the 11th edition of the Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London, was published by Richard Taylor, and that was 9 years before Richard Taylor and William Francis formed Taylor and Francis.
Oh, I didn't realize it'd been around that long.
Yeah. Well, so it was formed in the 1850s, and he was still alive, like doing the publishing himself at the time, which I just thought was really interesting because tons of scientific journals are published by Taylor and Francis now. Also, the meeting was only 7 years after the HMS Beagle had returned with all of Darwin's work on it, and there are references to the HMS Beagle in the proceedings from that year, where they're describing some new species within it, even on the same page as the moa, which is kind of fun to see. And the other cool thing about the proceedings is that they're written kind of like a play-by-play of what happened. It's almost like a stenographer or something describing the proceedings of it, whereas what I'm used to reading are just like a series of abstracts that are prepared by the authors, and they're a lot drier and things like that.
So they were taking the minutes.
Yeah, basically. So they have all these descriptions like, and then Owens went on to describe why he thought they went extinct. And like he eschewed the idea that it was such and such. It's really fun to read. But back to the moa. So Owen had previously called the moa Megalornis, but then found out that it was previously used by somebody else. So it was kind of like a occupied name. So he had to come up with something new. So he updated it to Dinornis. And that's what happened in this paper. So he explained that Dinornis was a large struthious bird, quote, of a heavier and more sluggish species than the ostrich, end quote. Which I think is a fun description, and also a pretty good description of what dinosaurs might have been like. And then Owens gave the same etymology of dinos, translating it as prodigious, which basically means impressively large. And then he combined it with ornis for bird. And so when you combine it, you get an amazingly large bird, which I think etymologically would have been a much better name than dinosaur for Dinosauria, because they basically are enormously large birds and have nothing to do with lizards, like dinosaur implies. And then while I was in this Arictodromeus burrow, I did a side tangent into finding the original article where he named Dinosauria, which I got somewhere else. But in 1842, he translated dinos as fearfully great, which is basically a synonym of prodigious and definitely not terrible. So I think a better two-word translation for dinosaur is prodigious lizard over terrible lizard.
Or fearfully great lizard.
Yeah. Yeah, or you could describe prodigious in better terms if you wanted to, like crazy huge or whatever.
So when we were talking about you going down this Arictodromeus burrow, I thought that it was a rabbit hole, like we often say, but also specifically about Arictodromeus.
Oh, no. It's not literally an Arictodromeus burrow.
All right. You're just bringing that term back.
Yes.
Got it.
I just love, though, that he named something Dinornis right after dinosaur and had no idea that they were related in any way.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Or maybe he had talked to Huxley and had an inkling. Who knows?
I didn't think they got along.
I don't think he got along with anybody.
Yeah, because he didn't get along with, I don't think he got along with Darwin, and Huxley was like a big fan of Darwin. But, yeah.
Just because you don't get along doesn't mean he didn't hear him sometime. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And also consider becoming a patron. You get bonus content and all sorts of goodies. That's at patreon.com/iknowdino. Thanks again, and until next time.